left field wall. Yeah, boy. Yes, yes, Jackie hit that ball.
Oh, excuse me. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Bob Hieronimus, and our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner, and our engineer is Anita Brockington. And our guest tonight is senior editor of Baltimore Magazine, and we're talking about historical baseball. We've already covered the original 1890s Orioles, and we've covered a lot of the Negro Leaguers. Babe Ruth, we haven't done Jim Palmer. We'll probably get there in just a little while. Now, there are no plaques or historical signs for all of the different places that honor the moment of the sites of the African American professional baseball history in Baltimore. And Cozy Bugle Field, where fans still in church clothes flocked for Sunday afternoon games and picnics, was sold and torn up just days after the end of 1949 season. As soon as integration began, the white teams began poaching the best of the players, the Negro League players, not paying them too much today, and that the East Baltimore site of Bugle Field stands vacant without so much as an historic marker. So what do you think about that?
Well, I've been over there. The with Charlie Vassalero at Baltimore baseball writer is really terrific, and we took a drive over there not too long ago. And it's a vacant lot at Federal Street, Edison Highway. It's not really super pedestrian friendly, but it would be great to have a historical marker there, especially when something new goes up on that site, on that land for sale, where it does have some traffic in and out and some foot traffic, and there's a bus stop there. And but also, there's a statue where the New York Mets minor league team plays in Coney Island that I've been to, with Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese together. And it would be great to have a statue of Roy Campanella and Junior Gilliam and Joe Black together outside Camden Yards, three, stars for championship elite Giants teams that went on to also win a championship with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Baltimore was not a stop for Roy Campanella. He played, if I'm not mistaken, 6 or 7 years here of the best years of his career. Would be great. And I think also it would help connect the story that, Frank Robinson, just missed playing in the Negro Leagues, but he grew out of that era when guys like Henry Aaron and Willie Mays had started their careers in the Negro Leagues and came to Major League Baseball. And Frank Robinson faced tremendous amount of racism in the South as a minor leaguer when he played ball. It's also a long forgotten story I'm just remembering now is Jackie Robinson, when he was with Montreal in the minors the year before he came to play for the Dodgers, he came to Baltimore to play against the Baltimore Orioles. And there was a big hullabaloo in the newspapers and at the game and everything about this black minor league ball player coming to Baltimore play. Baltimore is a very segregated city, obviously, 1946. And he took a lot of abuse from fans by all accounts, Jackie Robinson playing in Baltimore. So, definitely deserves to be honored. I mean, I don't know why it hasn't. I don't know why when we talk about Baltimore baseball, it begins and ends with, the 1954 Orioles, when there's a great history of baseball and Baltimore baseball all before that. I think. Yes. I think one of the great things, Bob, you must have seen this, is Ken Burns' documentary.
Oh yes.
And with the great Buck O'Neill, telling the stories of the games and the camaraderie and the kinship with the fans. And there's also that great play and film. The film was with Denzel Washington called Fences, Viola Davis, August Wilson. Denzel Washington plays a former Negro League player in Pittsburgh, which was home of the Homestead Grays. It really, these are not just great stories, just intrinsic to Baltimore's history and to our wider understanding of it.
And the destruction of that field in 1949. Now, that to me, that really hurt, because that was in 49. the Baltimore Elite Giants won everything. And it seems like as soon as that ended, that they just wiped that whole lot out. That disturbs me a great deal. Now, there are a lot of great Negro League ball players. You mentioned and also talk about John Beckworth, who hit 386 in 1924, 404 in 1925, and also arguably the best Baltimore Negro League player, Judd Wilson, and nicknamed Boojum. This is another guy that not just Geraldine Day and Leon thought so much of, but he talked about them all the time, because these guys were hitting 350, 389, and on base percentage 437. This is extraordinary. And if they would have been playing in the white major leagues, we would have had a better time.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, and Judd. I wish I knew more about the Baltimore Black Sox, but I know Judd Wilson's name. I mean, he's clearly one of the greatest hitters ever to play the game. Just somebody. I think I read a quote recently by Eddie Murray, and Eddie Murray said, he just could always hit when he was 8 or 9 years old in Little League. The coach would whip one in there, and if you didn't hit it, you had to run a lap around the field. And he's like, I could always hit it, And Judd Wilson seems to be one of these guys that could just wake up in the morning and swing the bat. And he was elected posthumously to the Hall of Fame, right? After his career, he worked on like a road construction crew in D.C. And they just were cast aside and not included with major league pensions and the like, and the game is really today built on the backs of these fellas.
Yep, indeed, it's kind of like the hidden secret of baseball, this time period, and and when you're with these players, they're almost all dead now. That was the craziest and saddest thing about when we were working to do this. We had to work as hard as we could because they were dying left and right. And so there are a number of other people that we wished we could have helped get into the Hall of Fame, but there just wasn't enough time. Because when they pass on, it makes it even harder to do it. And Judd Wilson's had his record elevated. Do you want to say anything about that?
I don't know. I can't recall the details, but the major leagues had said that they're going to recognize statistics from the Negro Leagues, right? And they didn't play necessarily a 154-game schedule every year and things like that, but I believe that they're going to authenticate the statistics from the Negro Leagues, right?
Right.
That's it's so long overdue. As this was certainly not a history I grew up knowing. I mean, I'm a lifelong baseball fan. I mentioned my grandfather. My dad was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. My uncle a New York Giants fan. I was watching games from the time I was 3 and 4 years old, playing as soon as I was old enough could pick up a bat. And didn't know this story really until I think Ken Burns' documentary comes out. But I didn't know the story of Roy Campanella playing in Baltimore until a couple of years ago, and I can't remember how I stumbled across it exactly. And it was shocking to me that we don't know this story.
That's for sure.
And Roy Campanella, was how I remember him as a kid, was in a wheelchair. He had suffered a car accident, a paralyzing car accident towards the very end of his career. He was in his late 30s, I guess. And his courage and living a full life and working for the major leagues and being a spokesperson, ambassador for the game for the Dodgers is how I remember him. I mean, really remarkable, human story.
It sure is. By the way, one more thing about Judd Wilson. He now officially ranks third all-time behind Ty Cobb and Rogers Hornsby. There's some people to be behind, I'll tell you. They're the best. And also... now Leon Day is recognized alongside Bob Feller as the two pitchers who pitched opening day no-hitters, and we did talk about that a little bit last mini.
Yeah, one thing that's worth remembering is this is a time when baseball is the preeminent sport in the country, right? The sports are boxing, horse racing, and baseball. Those are the three big sports. It's not football, not yet. It's not the national sport that is now, of course. Basketball was not the game that it is now. So everybody played baseball. Everyone, you know.
Well, I think we have timed this interview with you perfectly because you finished a huge feature in Baltimore Magazine on the Orioles' first modern day opening day in 1954. I really enjoyed this one. After 52 years without Major League Baseball in Baltimore, there will be in your April issue in Baltimore Magazine, issue coinciding with the start of baseball season. Will you tell us about it, please?
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, it'll be on stand late March, so a little bit later this month. It just seemed like we can't actually go to the game opening day, I guess, this year. But, you know, it seemed like a good time to remember the first opening day in Baltimore in 1954. And after these great Oriole teams in the 1890s, ironically, sadly, unfortunately, the Orioles franchise got bought and hijacked up to New York, where it eventually evolved into the New York Yankees. So not liking the New York Yankees is deep in our DNA. It predates Babe Ruth, the Baltimore boy going to play for them, right?
Yeah.
It was way back.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, Baltimore, 52 years without baseball. 1954, Baltimore, I believe, is about the sixth biggest city in the country at that time.
At that time, yeah.
Yeah, hasn't had baseball for more than a half century. And here it is, one of the great baseball cities in the country. And Tom the Elder, Tom D'Alessandro, the mayor, Nancy Pelosi's father, and businessman Bob Miles basically get to work on acquiring a franchise for the city, trying to entice somebody to move here. Baltimore fans are aware of this process, I guess. It's often fraught. But there's two teams in St. Louis, the Cardinals and the Browns. The Cardinals are historically a great franchise. The Browns, not so much, we'll say. But the Cardinals look like they could go bankrupt. Their owner's going bankrupt, and this colorful guy named Bill Veeck owns the Browns. But once Anheuser-Busch puts in a winning bid for the Cardinals, Bill Veeck, the owner of the St. Louis Browns, realizes it's probably time to cede St. Louis to the Cardinals, and he ends up selling his club to a Baltimore ownership group. And there's a parade like none other in Baltimore's history in 1954 for the first opening day.
I was there.
You were there?
Yes. My father, who actually was a baseball coach at times, stepfather that is, made sure that I went there. It was just amazing how many people were there. I think you pointed out there were 350 to 1,000 to 500,000. It sounds like Woodstock there. Down there, 500,000 fans lining the route from Camden Station to the Memorial Stadium in Waverly. Waverly is where I lived most of my life there. And you have some terrific pictures of this crowd with kids running up to the cars and carrying the players. And schools were closed, fortunately. That was half-day work, I think, also. I never understood why they didn't give them the whole day, but half-day was all they got. Who threw out the first pitch? Do you know?
Yeah, I do. And I always want to correct myself. It was Clarence Miles was the fellow with he was a prominent founder of Miles and Stockbridge, the Baltimore law firm, who really went about the business with D'Alessandro of acquiring the Browns, convincing them to move here. It was Richard Nixon throughout the first. Oh yes,
our man, Richard Nixon, right?
Yeah,
it was another president of the United States. There were a Republican that had to get thrown out.
A big sports fan. Big sports fan. It was. Mayor D'Alessandro was in the hospital with apparently suffering from exhaustion, is what they called it, so he wasn't even there, and Nixon threw out. By all accounts, vice president then threw out a pretty good pitch, but the just as you described it, I'll just say I just hope people pick up the magazine, because the photographs are just fantastic from the parade. An estimated between 350 500,000 people cramming the streets of Baltimore, and as the players recounted, they were. It was like they had won. It was like the war, or they'd won the World Series at the very least. And they hadn't even played a game yet in Baltimore. They had played the Orioles in 1954, and it was the team was kind of like, it was the St. Louis Browns remade. Everything was kind of hastily thrown together. Memorial Stadium was kind of still undergoing rehabilitation, because they only acquired the Browns a couple of months before. The team had split a pair of games on the road in Detroit against the Tigers, and had taken a train, you can imagine, all the way from Detroit. And they got off at Camden Station as Billy Hunter, surviving member of the team. He's 92 years old now. He was the starting shortstop that day.
Boy,
as he noted, ironically, coincidentally, where the Orioles now play, they disembarked there in these freshly pressed white uniforms and convertibles for this enormous parade. Marching bands, floats all the way to Waverly.
Were there 16 convertibles or 15, something like that?
Yeah, something like it. Yeah. And
I was wondering where we got them all.
More floats, and it was. The players were throwing out something like, one story from the archive said like 20,000 plastic baseballs to the kids. Yeah, and you see in the photographs, boys clamoring for them, kids on bikes riding alongside the parade, and young women as well reaching for the balls. Really just people hanging out in the windows the whole way, and it was really just bedlam. Baltimore was so excited to have Major League Baseball back in town.
Yeah. Now, so we had a game at that particular time, and we did okay. The first game. Here in Baltimore.
It was, the whole day was just one, for the ages. I mean, the Orioles win 3-1. They hit Clint Courtney, kind of a journeyman catcher.
Yeah.
Cracks the first home run in Memorial Stadium history. Vern Stevens, who was a veteran toward the end of his career, right? Because Orioles are basically hitter. Like an expansion club at the time. It's a mix of like never was and has-beens, kind of.
Yeah.
But Bob Turley, who goes on to have a pretty good career,
Remember Bob Turley? Jeez, whiz. Boy.
Yeah, he goes the distance and pitches, pitches a complete game. And the Orioles win 3-1, and sold out crowd, 46,000 Memorial Stadium. For one day, the Orioles are in first place, tied with a 2-1 record. And as you mentioned leading up, the accounts from the reporters at the time at the Baltimore Sun, elsewhere, essentially is nobody's at work that day, nobody's at school. Everybody's trying to watch on a television somewhere, department store or a bar or a restaurant or somewhere. Or they're at the game.
Well, that I'll never forget that time, mainly because my father-in-law at that time, stepfather, not my father-in-law. My father-in-law owns part of the Orioles, so that's a totally different thing. But that time period I remember so well because I actually saw my stepfather cry because this meant so much to him and everyone in Baltimore. There's not a baseball game that the Orioles ever played that he did not listen to. That was major part of his life. Sitting there, smoking a cigar, having a good time, driving a couple of beers, and listening to the Orioles. They didn't necessarily win too many at that time, but he sure loved it. And it was good. It probably added 20 years onto his life, which is, so I think that's what baseball has done for him anyway.
I think baseball on the radio is, a kind of a quintessential American experience. I imagine they listen to soccer on the radio in Europe or something, but, I mean, certainly there's a time period, and still, if you happen to be driving, it's great to listen on the radio, but where everybody right on the front stoop in Waverly or Highlandtown would have the Orioles game on the radio, whether having a Natty Bow in the evening, right? And,
right.
One of the great. if I could connect the dots of it, one of the great things the Orioles did at the time in 1954 was they brought Blanche McGraw, who was the widow of John McGraw, she was from Baltimore. That's why he's buried here, and brought her out to celebrate the parade, as well as brought back a couple of the old 1890 ball players, Dirty Jack Doyle, the first baseman, and a former catcher, Bill Boilyard Clark, who had hit like 339 and 297 for the champion 96 Orioles, were brought back as part of the celebration of the team coming and participated in media interviews and things like that. So you brought back a couple guys in their mid 80s who had played for the 1890 Orioles. And remember, at that point, only guys who were kids in the 1890s are really even still alive to see the return of baseball. It had been that many generations had passed without baseball in Baltimore.
Well, you tell all the details behind the negotiation. You touched on this before, but I maybe wanted to go a little bit more into this because it was really tough getting this Telesandro, getting the St. Louis Browns, because Bill Veeck there were some difficulties there with him, wasn't there?
Well, Bill Veeck, right, was a really unconventional owner, and he had done things like have a 3'7" Eddie Goodell, kind of famously in Baltimore in baseball history, be a pinch hitter, and he was actually a big supporter of Negro League baseball as well. Which was not really encouraged, especially in the American League. But he was ready to sell his team, and he tried to sell it to an ownership group in Milwaukee, which did not have a team, and Boston had two teams. And his fellow American League owners wanted to save Milwaukee for the Boston Braves, so they would not okay that deal. So that's when he turned eventually to Baltimore and to Clarence Miles and D'Alessandro. And the first agreement they made was thwarted essentially by the Yankees owner. Mm-hmm. He did not want another team on the East Coast.
That's right.
This is another reason
that's amazing reading. That's amazing reading when finding out exactly what a struggle that was and the games they were playing there. I mean, not baseball games,
there's
but
backroom deals. There's big
right.
money at stake, corporate money at stake, and the owner of the Yankees, this guy Del Webb, apparently has some other business interests in Los Angeles, and he wants the baseball team out there.
Right.
And of course, eventually the Dodgers and Giants and stuff go a couple of years later, but D'Alessandro came back from New York where they signed the deal. The American League finalized the Baltimore would get a club, and basically said, "Hey, it was the Yankees trying to prevent us from getting a club here." And so there's a deep, like I said, the deep rivalry with the Yankees among Baltimore fans.
That even made it worse. That's for sure.
And I'm sorry, maybe you're going to get to this, but Gerald Hofberger. Plays a huge role. The former president of National Brewing Company, makers of Natty Boh, plays an enormous role in getting the team. Would not have happened without him.
Hey, whatever happened to Gunther beer? Didn't you ever have any Gunther beers? Do you remember?
I remember Gunther beer. I'm not sure. I guess they were still around when I hit the legal drinking age. I grew up so. I don't remember drinking Gunther beer really. I remember that it existed, but I don't remember.
Oh, sure, it certainly did exist.
Yeah.
Well. We're overdue for a break. I'm sorry, guys out there, mainly because I get so excited about this. I have such a good time with this kind of discussion on something that means a great deal to Baltimore, and hopefully in years to come, we'll be back up there. But right now, we're going to take a break here on 21st Century Radio with our guest, Ron Cassie. And let's see, eventually we're going to get to Jim Palmer. And we're going to get to a few other things that I can't see right now because it's being hidden by a cup of coffee right now. We'll be back on 21st Century Radio with our guest.
It's a beautiful day for a ball game, name is Stanley Glenn from the Philadelphia Stars baseball team of the Negro National League. This is 21st Century Radio, and I'm very privileged to be in this spot.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio with Ron Cassie, senior editor of Baltimore Magazine. We've covered an awful lot of things, and we still got a lot more to go here. But let's close down the Orioles in the 1954, that is, close down in the sense of talking down, except for this. We know what happened the first day, but what about the rest of the season? How would you analyze the rest of our season for 1954?
It was a season of valleys and ravines.
Valleys and ravines. Okay.
Yeah, they lost as opposed to peaks and valleys, right? They lost 100 games, not unexpectedly. The Browns had lost 100 before. The noteworthy things that happened is a couple things are in place, however. One is Gerald Hofberger, who's the owner. The other is that by the end of the year, they've hired away the Chicago White Sox manager, Pete Richards.
Oh boy, that was a big one. Yeah.
So they steal him away, and Richards is both the general manager and the coach. And to his credit, the Browns / now Orioles have some good scouts and some good people in their farm system. The Browns had not had any money to actually build a farm system, but the Orioles with Hofberger and the fact they draw 1 million fans the first year, which is a lot in those days, to Memorial Stadium, they've got some money to work with. And so Pete Richards and some really sharp farm system guys invest and start sign some good young ball players in the next few years. One specifically that after that first off season, so it's in February 1955, so it's the 1954 off season. They sign a young kid, a 17-year-old schoolboy from Arkansas named Brooks Robinson. And so the groundwork, the foundation is kind of already in place. Even though the Orioles looked pretty bad in 54, by the end of that season, that off season, the future is the groundwork is there for an exciting future. And by 1960, just 6 years later, the Orioles are challenging the Yankees for the American League title.
Yeah. I thought that was wonderful because. Okay, now there's another book here that I just fell in love with here. Flamethrower Dalko. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Dalko?
Yeah, Steve Dalkowski, yeah.
We got to take our time on this because I think this is really something. You also sent me this copy of that review of that new book called Dalko. Also upcoming in your April issue is the real former Oriole minor leaguer who helped inspire the movie Bull Durham. Is this correct, sir? This
is a true fact. Steve, the book is called Dalko. It's a great read for real baseball fans and Oriole fans. It's a trip as well through the Orioles minor league system of the late 50s and early 60s. Steve Dalkowski was an Oriole minor leaguer and is generally considered the fastest pitcher in baseball history, throwing, experts believe, upwards of like 110 miles an hour. He was unhittable often. He was often perhaps the wildest pitcher in baseball. And the fellow who wrote and directed Bull Durham, as named Ron Shelton, played in the Orioles minor league system. Now, he came after Dalkowski, but Dalkowski, who never made it to the major leagues because of his wildness, a serious drinking problem, that impaired, was really damaging to his life, not just his baseball career, and injuries, which not uncommon with pitchers, right? Kind of derailed him from actually reaching the majors, unfortunately. But Ron Shelton heard stories about Steve Dalkowski, the hardest throwing, a hard living guy, and it was kind of the inspiration for his Nuke LaLoosh character, the Tim Robbins character in Bull Durham. And the whole story in general was kind of Ron Shelton, apparently, while he's riding the buses in the minor leagues with guys like Bobby Grich, he's got a notebook and he's writing down, everything as he's going along. He never makes it to the major, but he makes probably the greatest baseball movie ever.
Oh, that is really fascinating. 110 miles an hour. I don't know how they could have clocked it at that time, so that might be a tiny bit of an exaggeration, do you think?
Well, right. So the radar guns have clocked guys upwards of 100 miles an hour, right? Since they didn't have it, then. But what's really clear about him is Cal Ripken Sr., son Sam McDowell, one of the hardest throwers major league pitchers of all time, who saw Dalko pitch. They all said he was much faster than anybody they'd ever seen before.
Well.
So you're talking about Sam McDowell, who pitched for the Indians, who had his own drinking problem, but Hall of Fame ability, threw 100 miles an hour, saying Dalko threw much faster than he did. It's so I don't know if it's 110 or 107 or 108, but the movement on his ball and the speed was just. I mean, he struck out 20 guys, would walk 20 in a game. I mean, he threw out a speed that was just unhittable for players. So he was clearly a notch or two above Bob Feller or McDowell, some of these other guys of the era.
Yeah, but not a step above Leon Day, though.
Well, in terms of speed, yeah. In terms of speed, but not maybe he didn't have Leon Day's control. He didn't have a mix of pitches. He had one pitch.
Did you know that Leon Day, every game he played against, Satchel Paige, he beat him 4 out of 4. No one's ever done that to Satchel Paige. That gives you an idea of just how good this guy was.
Yeah, Satchel Paige was a hard thrower as a young guy. He was a really hard thrower. And Leon Day also played in the field, right? I mean, he was a remarkably talented player. He could play second base and center field.
Yep. Well, most of the Negro Leaguers had to do that because their teams, they only had 12 to 15 people on that.
Right.
So if they got hurt, they were in trouble. So that's really one of those things about Negro.
You can't go barnstorming with a bullpen of 10 or 11 guys.
No, well, they had to sometimes because they had traveled by cars and they didn't have very big cars. Every now and then they could get a bus, but they usually would break down. But that all those stories, boy. And breaking down in the South when you're involved in baseball is a real difficult time. It's bad enough to eat down there if you can get out of there alive because they were threatened all the time. But
even with Dalkowski, when he's in the minor leagues in the late 50s, and it's guys aren't making a lot of money. They have off season. They're working the off season, just enough to get by, kind of.
So that was the major troubles with the guy that could actually just strike out just about anyone. What's the title of the book one more time?
Yeah, it's called Dalko.
Dalko, the untold story of baseball's fastest pitcher.
That's it. Yeah.
And so, when did you read this?
Just a couple months ago, I finished. So we have it I thought it'd be great for our April issue to be a review and a little Q&A with one of the authors in the magazine for April for our Orioles preview. It's just a great read for Orioles fans. Both, serious baseball fans, and I think it's a real human story at the center of it.
We got to take another break here on 21st Century Radio. Our guest, Ron Cassie, Senior Editor of Baltimore Magazine, and you can find our guest links on our Facebook page for 21st Century Radio, and you can order his book, If You Love Baltimore, It Will Love You Back, and at Amazon or from his website, roncassie.com. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. We're in our last segment here on 21st Century Radio with a dear friend of mine, Ron Cassie. Cassie. And we're getting to Mr. Jim Palmer. I very much enjoyed reading your extensive profile on Jim Palmer that was published on his 50th anniversary with the club. You headlined it Rare Bird. After 50 years with the Orioles, Jim Palmer still isn't perfect, but give him time. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, this is a number of years ago. I think people remember a couple of things from around that era. One is, Jim Palmer has gotten remarried and is he has an autistic son now, and it really seems to have softened Jim's softened him up a lot. I think just in publicly, like that maybe we didn't see Jim Palmer's emotions before. Kind of famously, like a lot of athletes, kept them in check and off the camera in a very kind of like well-coiffed public persona. And also so that was one thing. He started making appearances, I think, with and also Mike Flanagan, who was a friend of his, an Orioles, baseball pitching star, was in the front office. Committed suicide a few years earlier in 2011. A heartbreaking story, and I think I remember watching the Orioles telecast when that had happened, when the news was kind of broke during the telecast, and Jim talking about it afterwards, and being emotional, getting choked up, and so I think Jim always had this persona of being this great athlete, and doing like the television commercials and the sports announcing, and not really showing a lot of vulnerability kind of thing, which a lot of athletes, a lot of men don't, which is fine, but I think Orioles fans begin to see another dimension of him, which was welcome, which is great, and embraced him more. I think to me, Brooks Robinson is certainly the most beloved ball player Orioles of all time.
Yes,
Boog Powell might be second, but Jim Palmer is real, and Frank was definitely the greatest player, I think, but Jim Palmer is really the greatest Oriole ever. He'd been with the club now like 55 years, as a minor leaguer, pitcher, announcer. He won 20 games, 8 years. He was often with one of the best baseball color analysts in the game. He can get a little into the weeds, but he brings great intelligence and insight, and is a pleasure to listen to during the games, which baseball, you have time to listen to a game and enjoy the announcers. And, when for somebody like me and all the stories we've been talking about, is he's been with the Orioles all along. He played with Boog Powell and Brooks Robinson. Well, Boog and Brooks signed with the Orioles in the 1950s. Jim came shortly afterwards. So there isn't anything that's happened in Orioles modern day history. Harry Dalton, the great GM, was his GM. That is not linked to Jim Palmer. He doesn't have the story, so he brings great context, great storytelling to the telecast, and remarkably enduring athlete. Won World Series games in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, which nobody else has ever done.
He was in 3 World Series.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
He won 268 games. I'm so sorry that I know he wanted to go on to try to get to that 300 number.
Yeah.
And I wish you could have done it. But a lot of things were against him in that, though. But that's the most ever by an Oriole. And becoming the pitcher and to win a World Series game in 3 different decades, his number has been retired. And he is in, fortunately, of course, the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Well, obviously he belongs there. Not because he's white, but because he's a good ball player.
Well, I don't know how much money he would make today.
Yeah, how much do you think he would?
Just in crazy. I think just unbelievable. And I think too, like one of the things I was following as a baseball fan is, Jim Palmer was out of baseball essentially for like 2 years. He pitched since 1966. He won 15 games. He won a World Series game. He was like 19 years old, future as bright as can be, and he suffered, a shoulder injury that looks like it may derail his career, which it does so many pitchers, right? And he basically doesn't pitch for the Orioles for at all in 67 and 68. And with the help of some anti-inflammatory medicine, eventually is able to restart his career. But we talked a little bit, about it. But you can imagine what it's like thinking, one moment you have the world by the tail, the next minute it looks like you're never going to play again. He hadn't gone to college. He had gone to the Orioles minor league system out of high school. What he was going to do for the rest of his life, right? You're 20, 21, and you're not able, to throw a ball.
Well,
eventually it comes back around in the winter leagues for him.
Well, I especially appreciated him and Brooks Robinson for the reason that when we were taking the Negro League players to the White House, which we did twice under two different presidents, he signed the bats along with Brooks, and Brooks also helped us out in that, and that made a heck of a difference to the president at the time we gave them the bats to that, because at that particular time, I'm trying to remember which president it was right now. Oh, Bush, and Bush was a baseball player, as you know yourself. Yeah. First baseman, not a very good one. He fudged his statistics a couple of times, but we enjoyed meeting Bush at that time. And so did the Negro League players. Bush allowed the players to come into his office, sit around, stand around, and enjoy themselves. One of the pictures that we have of one of these guys who was so happy to sit in the president's chair was he had his legs and feet propped up on the president's desk. Now, Bush saw that. It didn't bother him at all. He felt, because he was so excited to be with these other ball players. Now, I'm not a big Bush fan, but to be and spend time with him, there was another side to him. And, of course, he had a brother named John who were very close to. So, anyway, but he was a poster boy also, Jim Palmer. I didn't understand that at first for a long time ago when I saw him in his jockey underwear in the 1980s. I was wondering what was going on. Who was the football player that did that with leggings or something like that? Joe Namath?
Namath did a little more, funnier commercials with shaving commercials and with pantyhose, I think, and stuff. A bunch of the athletes did the jockey commercials. That was popular, but they. So that was real money in those days. Jim Palmer wasn't making $10 or $15 million a year. And by the way, I didn't know that story about Brooks and Jim signing the bats to help support the cause. That's nice to hear. I think I really never heard either one of them or any of those old time Orioles begrudge anybody else.
Well, Brooks was just an incredible soul. Is an incredible soul. And he is perhaps one of the greatest players we've ever had, and no ego. No. Oh, and I don't know about that with Palmer, but I can say that for sure. Otherwise, by the way, we just got a few minutes, and I want to ask you about the anonymous Twitter account that you started at the beginning of the pandemic last year. I don't know much about how Twitter works, so would you tell us a little bit about what you mean by live tweeting and et cetera?
Well, I guess this hasn't been public before, but
I apologize. I didn't mean to do something like that, but
that's okay. Because there was no baseball last season, I was getting itchy for baseball, and in April, the first month of the season, I started a Twitter account called at 70s Orioles. At 1970 Orioles, and I basically live tweeted the entire 1970 Baltimore Orioles season, like one game at a time, like it was happening in real time, diving through the archives and everything. And it was a blast, really. It made up for it. Rather than watching the game at night, I'd go through I'd go through the archives and and find the old accounts of the games and add pictures and all that stuff. And it was a lot of fun. The people who follow the Twitter, it has like 4,000 followers, just that quickly.
4,000 followers.
Yeah, just like overnight. And
what an army you got there, brother.
Yeah, it was a blast, and the feedback and the response and interaction with other Orioles fans was just a great joy. Just brought so much fun. And it's still rolling. We're kind of into the 1971 season's about to start, but it was so much fun and made up for the lack of baseball season. It was really great to relive that year. It was 50 years ago, and with all the fans to remember that and everything. So that was just a blast, and kind of a repurposing of Twitter rather than being this thing that where people are always snapping at each other and debating politics. It became a little more, kind of creative outlet and a fun outlet to replay the 1970 season again one day at a time. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, yes. I must have been at 4,000 people following you along the lines there. How can listeners follow your writings?
At Baltimore Magazine, you can subscribe. It's pretty cheap.
Tell us how they can subscribe. How to do it.
Yeah, just go to baltimoremagazine.net and there's a subscription button there you can find. So if you just go online, Baltimore Magazine, it's really just a couple bucks a year for the issues. That's the best way. 12 issues a year, and also follow us online. Follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, I'm on Twitter too at Ron_Cassie, and tweet most of my stories and colleagues' stories. And
well, I think we're out of time, but thank you for joining us. We had a great time.